Hello, and welcome to Money Mondays, powered by the Joseph Business School. I'm your host, Jill Thompson, and today's segment is about real estate, the real estate. And if you're a first-time home buyer, you have tuned in to the right segment. Home ownership is a kingdom principle. The Bible tells us in Proverbs 24, verses 3 and 4, through wisdom a house is built, and by understanding it is established. By knowledge the rooms are filled with all precious and pleasant riches. Buying a home is an exciting time in your life, and buying your first home is a big accomplishment. There are some things, however, that you must learn before taking this leap of faith in ownership. The Bible tells us that the wise seek counsel to avoid the pitfalls and snares of the enemy. We do not want you to have buyer's remorse, so we've assembled a team of experts to answer all your questions around buying your first home. Today, we're bringing to the segment Walanda Cannon, broker of Annie Real Estate, Lutalo McGee, managing broker of Annie Real Estate, Michelle Aponte Bosca, loan officer of Pearl Mortgage, and Yandi K. Morris Andrews of KMR Attorney Law Group. Without further ado, welcome everyone.
Hi, Jill.
Hi. So let's start the dialogue with what's the difference between ownership and renting?
There's definitely a difference between ownership and renting. So some of the pros and cons would be those who are renters. Of course, this is, you might be in a lease situation. It can be a month to month. It can be a year term. It can be a 2-year term. Some of the advantages of renting is you might have a lower cost investment when you first, kind of start. You may have to put 1 month down or a couple months down, depending on the arrangement. You also won't have to be concerned about maintenance or upkeep. That's usually the responsibility of the landlord or the property owner. And then you also have flexibility. So if you decide that you're ready to move, you give maybe a 30, 60-day notice that you're ready to move, and you can kind of pick your family up and then go to the next location. Now, the pros of owning a home, however, is, you get some tax credits for home ownership. You can get some write-offs with that. You have stability. Some people don't like to pick up and move and uproot their families after 1 or 2 years. Yeah. You also have the pride of ownership. You have your own space. No one can just, like on the renter side where the pro was you can get up and move. The con is also someone can tell you to move in 30 to 60 days too. And owning a home, you kind of have those things kind of set. A con to owning a home, though, is that, the maintenance that would be, the responsibility of the homeowner is now all yours. But, yeah.
So just to add, one of the things that I think the difference between home ownership and renting is wealth building.
Okay.
At the end of the day, wherever you live, you have to buy a building. The question is, are you buying a building for yourself or are you buying it for someone else?
Okay.
You could pay $12,000 a year for the next 5 years if you're renting and you own nothing on the back end. You pay $12,000 a year and you own your own property. Theoretically, you have some equity and stake in that property, which is basically generational wealth that you're building for your family.
Yeah. Got it. Okay, so can someone define what does a first-time home buyer look like? What's that definition?
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting, and it can vary because some people, when you think about like programs out there, grant money that's out there, a first-time home buyer could be someone who's purchased before but hasn't owned in a long time. Yep. But typically a first-time home buyer is someone who comes to us and says, I've never done this before, I know nothing about the process, hold my hand through the entire thing. And so they're coming to Walanda, or they're coming to Lou in the very beginning saying, I just want to buy a house, help me. And that's where they step in.
Got it. And you talked about a time frame there. So typically for a person who maybe has not been in this particular market in a while, what does that time frame look like?
So I don't know exactly, and Michelle might be able to give exact guidelines, but there are some programs that say you couldn't have owned within the last like 5 or 7 years or so. So let's say that you bought back in the 80s or 90s. Then you sold your home maybe during the recession and you rented for some years and then came back and wanted to purchase again. There are some programs that could consider you a new home buyer.
Got it. Okay. And then can we talk about what's required when buying your first home? What does that checklist look like for that first time home buyer?
That's a really good question, Giorgio. I think that it looks, the checklist is different at different phases,
Got it.
right? So when you're first, kind of looking for your home, I think the first thing that I would say, and most people would not have this on their list, would be to educate yourself, not just on what homes are on the market, right? But attend a first-time home buyer class, understand what all the steps are.
Yeah, that's good.
Another thing I would say is definitely begin to save. There are some instances where people can buy a home and hardly bring anything to the table, right? But that doesn't mean that you won't have an investment up front. There is earnest money that's involved. There's inspections that are not necessarily required but highly recommended. Those things are things that you pay. You have an appraisal that has to get done for the home. All of those are expenses that are out of pocket before you get to the closing table, even if you don't have to pay out of your pocket at the closing table. So those are some things that I would say are some of the initial first steps. I know that there's some steps on the lending side as well.
Yeah, I think what's really important is for people to have a budget in mind as to what they actually want to spend on a mortgage. I think that's very important because at the end of the day, as a lender, I can tell a customer what they may qualify for according to guidelines, but ultimately that person may not want to spend that much. So setting their own personal budget is going to be number one. And then of course, going through the pre-approval process to find out what you're actually qualified for and what those numbers look like.
Okay, and there was something that you brought up in the midst of the conversation, earnest money, and I know it comes up quite often. People want to know, if I give it, do I get it back? What are some instances where a person did not receive their earnest money back, but can someone also define what is earnest money?
Yeah, so earnest money is essentially money that you're putting up at the start of the transaction, and it's like your good faith. It's your will to say, I am moving forward, I am serious, and you're starting your process. You've signed your contract, the seller has accepted your contract. Now, earnest money, in theory, is always protected as long as the buyer is essentially doing right in the process. So let's say that we have a buyer, everything has gone right, we're getting ready to close, and the buyer says, I changed my mind. You definitely would not get your earnest money back at that point. Because at that point, the seller has taken the property off the market for, the 60 days that it's taken for you to close. They've maybe lost some money during that period. They've lost other potential offers. So in that situation, a buyer does, they're going to lose their earnest money. But let's say that the buyer puts up earnest money and then they're working with Michelle to get their loan approved, and for some reason their loan just does not get approved. Then the buyer is able to cancel that contract and they do get their earnest money back because they didn't act in any malice. It just didn't work.
Okay. And so another thing you brought up is you said that there are several people that are involved in the process. So we know that there's the broker, which we have the two of you here who can kind of guide us through that process. We know that we have the lender and then also an attorney like yourself. But are there any other people who are a part of the equation to get us into that home?
Absolutely. When I was talking about kind of the process, there's also your inspector.
Okay.
Now, the inspector is, they come in after you've found the house that you love, you've submitted your earnest money in good faith that this is the house that you want. Well, the inspector, he's the one who's going to do the litmus test to say, is this house really worth, you going through with this deal?
Okay.
And so that inspector will come in and they'll assess the property. They're not just looking for, is the property safe, but they're looking, or they're not just looking for things that are apparent to our natural eye, but they're also pulling back, you know what I mean? They're going in attics, they're checking for mold and termites and things that the regular buyer would not, normally see.
Okay.
And depending on what comes back on that inspection report, it can determine if that first-time home buyer or any buyer walks away from the deal or not. But definitely an inspector and insurance, I would say an insurance person as well.
An appraiser.
And so thinking about what you just said, does it also leave room for negotiation as far as the price, the purchasing price, when maybe I may go in and there are some issues in the attic, or maybe there is some mold in the property? Does that allow me the ability to negotiate a contract?
So normally the price is not negotiable. There are times where we will go back and try and resubmit another offer if the nature of what was found in the inspection is severe enough.
Okay.
But typically we're negotiating the seller to do repairs or sometimes offer repair credits to address certain things that were found during the inspection.
Got it. Can either of you provide an example of maybe a client that you're working with who was a first-time?
I'm kidding.
Okay. Well, then maybe you can start the dialogue, Rolanda. Tell us about maybe a first-time home buyer that you've worked with so far. who maybe was buying a home, or maybe someone was purchasing a building as their first time?
Yeah, gosh, I feel like this, seriously, that inspection, when you get that inspection report back, you are really with your buyer and, just really trying to figure out really what's going to happen. I had one deal where there was mold in the attic,
Oh, wow.
right? And so it wasn't a lot of mold, but it was about, a good patch of it. And so my client really, really wanted the property. We had been looking for about 3 months or so. And, and for my client, that was a really, really big deal. And the seller did not want to budge and get that mold remediated. And we were in that space, and Yandi, I think you worked with me on this deal. We were in that space for a little bit and had to go back and forth. Ultimately, the seller ended up doing it. The inspector came back out to verify that that mold was remediated, but it almost tore that deal apart, and my client and I were going to be back pounding the pavement looking for a new house.
Yeah.
But that happens. It happens often.
One of the interesting things with inspections, and we talk about our clients, or talk with our clients about this all the time, is that sometimes things found during an inspection don't necessarily require us to go back and try and negotiate with the seller. If you had a phenomenal broker and that broker was able to negotiate a great deal, and let's say you get that property $10,000 below market value, if the inspector comes and finds 15 things, but the estimate for those 15 things comes up to $1,000, you may not want to go back to the seller and say, hey, I need you to address these 15 things, because you already got a great deal.
Yeah, you're already getting the $10,000 less.
Absolutely. So what we tell our clients all the time is always contingent and always is stipulated based on what kind of deal you're getting.
Got
I
it.
agree with that. Can I also say this too? You asked a question about what does a person need, when they're preparing for a home. Michelle said, have your budget in mind.
Yes.
I would also say for first-time home buyers, have your ideal situation in mind. What's your motivator? Are you looking to, expand the space for your family, and that's what you need? Are you looking to get a deal where you can save money, and that's what you need? Are you looking to be in a certain location, and that's what you need? All of those factors drive your activity and the activity for your realtor. And I'm going to tell you, like, in buying a home for some people can be really, really emotional.
Okay.
And when you in the spaces of negotiating and trying to put a deal together, a good agent is going to bring you back to your vision.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Well, we know this, right? The vision, make it plain, right? A good agent will bring you back to your vision and say, okay, when we first started, here were your truths. This is why you were looking. This is what you were looking, so that you don't get clouded by all of this turmoil of how I'm feeling and they're trying to take advantage of me. You know what I mean? So I would say that.
And I just want to add that I think it's really important to make sure you have a really good team.
Yeah.
So just on a personal level, I purchased a home. My husband and I purchased a home a few months ago, and Lou was our agent on that transaction. Michelle was our lender on that transaction.
Congratulations.
Helping show houses. Okay. And so it was literally our dream house. And Lou knew that. Rolanda knew that. Everyone understood that was our dream house. But in the inspection process, we found, certain things that popped up. Within a moment's notice, my team pulled together, an engineer to come to the house to help, an architect, people to help me figure out, is this house the house for us, even though it's our dream? And so if we had an agent that didn't have contacts, all throughout the industry, I don't know what we would have done. So it's really important to make sure you have the right people on your team, because every real estate agent does not have those types of resources to make sure that we get, what we need done.
I also think the professional that you work with have to have a sense of ethics, agent, your lender, your attorney, et cetera, because there's so many different things that come up that increase the risk for a first-time home buyer if they don't have people who are professional. Unfortunately, we do have people in our business who their primary focus is just kind of making money and not necessarily taking care of people.
That's right.
The professional that you want to work with, you want to make sure that they have a history of taking care of people, right, as well as, turning sales.
Yeah.
Got it. And so in addition to just thinking about a home in general, what about for those who are interested in maybe townhomes or even condos for their first property? Do you guys educate them on maybe the fees that are associated with those types of things? Like, I believe I've heard the term HOA fees.
Yeah.
Can someone explain that?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So kind of going back to the budget, when I first talked to someone initially about what they're looking to spend, that housing payment is inclusive of an assessment if it is a condo or townhome. The assessment is going to include various things depending on the building, and you guys
Okay.
may be able to add more to that. So sometimes it just covers the maintenance of the property, of the common areas, the insurance.
Okay.
In other cases, it may include snow removal,
Yeah.
or there may be a
The
gym in the building.
disposal
So it kind of
gym,
just depends on what is inclusive of in that building.
Okay.
But that assessment fee is going to be part of your monthly payment. So when we're talking about what's your monthly payment, we're considering what the assessment may look
Yeah.
like in addition to taxes and insurance.
Just to rewind a little bit, just in case first-time home buyers that are watching don't necessarily know what an HOA is or an assessment is. Basically, when you buy a condo or a townhome, there's basically like a governing organization over that condo complex or that
Okay.
townhome complex.
Yeah.
And they're responsible for things like exterior maintenance, maintaining building insurance in case something happens to the structure, and a number of other things depending on the typical project for the
Got
most
it.
part. So in order to maintain that government, you kind of got to pay taxes or dues to that government, which is what your HOA is.
Okay.
The other thing I want to say on that too is, so you'll have your HOA fee that's built into, kind of your overall monthly payment. But sometimes there might be special assessments that are connected to that particular homeowners association. Also, if you're in a luxurious area, or even sometimes not, you'll pay for parking. You'll pay condos downtown, their parking is $25,000 a year just for the parking
Wow.
space on top of what you're paying for the property. Sometimes you'll pay for storage areas as well. And so those are additional things like when you're considering a condo or a townhouse. The other thing too is the difference between a regular home and when you're buying a condo, or I should say getting approved for a condo or a townhome, is the health of that condo association. Just because you like it doesn't mean that your lender will approve you getting into that space. They are looking at not just that unit or you as a buyer, they are looking at, are there foreclosures within that association or condo unit?
Okay.
They're also looking at, are homeowners within that unit paying their HOA fees? Is the HOA responsible? Do they have track records? Are they having meetings and minutes and bylaws? So there's a lot that comes into, other than what you would pay, there's a lot that comes into buying a condo and a townhouse as well.
And I wanted to add to that, so just so people can have some sort of idea about what HOA fees could look like. If you're buying a home in, let's say, Bronzeville or Kenwood, sometimes you'll see association fees as low as $150 up to maybe $300 a month, depending on what all it includes. I've looked at condos and townhomes in like the Hyde Park area, for instance, and if the building is old, sometimes those assessments are anywhere from $500 to $1,000 a month.
On top of your mortgage.
On top of all of your monthly fees. If you're downtown where there's a doorman and a gym and a pool, you might be looking at $1,200 a month. So all of that varies, and Rolanda brought up a good point about special assessments. And so that essentially means that there's something that happened in the property that the property owners have to cover. So an example of that would be that there needs to be a new roof. And so what happens is, let's say that you have a building with 10 different unit owners, and for easy math, let's say the roof is going to be $10,000.
Okay.
That means that on top of your regular assessments, on top of your mortgage payment, there's a $10,000 gap that has to be filled, and each owner has to contribute to that. So that might be $1,000 that each owner has to pay toward that roof. So it's essentially something that you didn't necessarily plan for. But back to Rolanda's point, associations often do try to build in for things like a roof needing to be replaced. So when you're budgeting and you have a treasurer for your HOA, hopefully they have reserves in there for kind of rainy day expenses.
Yeah. Okay. Question for you. How does a first-time home buyer, because they're new to this process, how do they know if they're actually getting a good deal on a particular property? Let's say I'm a first-time home buyer. I know nothing about this area, but I know I want to move in it. And I know you gave an example of maybe like Bronzeville. And so let's say that there was a property over there for $400,000. And to me, I'm like, that number is outrageous. But to you, you may say, that's an excellent buy, Jill. How do we know? Where can we go and look to see this is the rate or the going high or low for this particular area?
So typically, if you're working with a realtor, your realtor should be your guide in terms of figuring out what the value of that property is. We are bound by law, if we're given professional opinion, to prepare reports where we basically take that subject property that you're interested in and then look at comparables that are like it.
Okay.
And what we use, or what the common term is, an apple-to-apple comparison. So let's say I'm looking at a single family in Beverly, 3 bedroom, 2 baths. I'm gonna look for other single-family, 3-bedroom, 2 baths that have sold in that immediate area, in that neighborhood defined by specific boundaries
Got it.
in the last couple months.
Okay.
And I wanna see what they sold for, and that kind of gives me a guide in terms of what the value of the subject property is.
Okay.
If there are a little bit of difference, let's say my subject property has a garage, but the comparables don't have a garage, I may adjust just to add the value of the garage.
Got it.
But that's how we kind of determine what the value is. And it's important, it's critically important, because if you don't know what the value of that property is and you enter into a contract, you got to pay the fees that Wilana talked about. You got to pay for an inspection, you got to pay for an appraisal, and if it comes back and it doesn't appraise out, there's a chance that that deal cancels, and then the money that you would have paid leading up to that point, you basically would have lost.
Got it. So just to reiterate, for those of you who are watching, in order for you to effectively know if you're getting a good market rate, what he stated is to compare apples to apples. So if you know you're interested in a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom home, then how they do it is they assess it based upon what other properties that are 3-bedroom, 2-bathrooms that are in that community or in that area and the prices that they have been selling for. That's how you know if you're getting a great rate.
And there are a couple things I want to add to that. So typically we look at similar exterior type. So if I'm looking at a brick, I'm gonna look at a brick property. We look at kind of the same age range in terms of when that property was built or either rehabbed.
This is good information.
Or
Square
just similar
footage.
condition,
Square
square
footage.
footage, similar size. I'm
Okay.
not gonna compare a $1,000 home to a
1,000
1,000
square
square foot
foot.
home to
Got
a
it.
2,500 square foot home. And then I'm gonna look for similar conditions. So if
Okay.
this has been recently rehabbed, I'm not gonna pick a comparable that hasn't been rehabbed in 20 years.
Okay.
The other thing is that because there is going to be an appraisal done, once the person goes through the process, the bank has an appraiser go out and they determine whether or not the house is essentially worth what it's being sold for.
Okay.
So there's always there's a second level of protection for the buyer because the bank is not going to allow a person to buy that $400,000 home in Brownsville that you spoke of if it's actually only worth $350,000.
That's good to know.
So yeah, it's like a catch-all for us to make sure that that person is buying a home that's worth what they say it's worth.
I don't want to belabor the point. It's important for your realtor to really give you an idea of what it's valued up front.
Okay.
So we don't get to an appraisal and then the appraisal doesn't support the value. Because then the attorney would have spent a bunch of time working with you.
Yeah.
And it doesn't go through. Your realtor would have spent a bunch of time as well as your lender.
Giorgio, just one more thing on that. Looking at the value or understanding if you're getting a good deal on a property is one thing when you're doing, when you have a realtor to kind of do what we call a comparative market analysis.
Okay.
That's the report kind of that Lou is talking about. But there are also things that when, let's say you find the house that you're looking for, you love this house. Before you submit an offer on that house, yes, you want to see if it's up to market standard, but there are also other things on the back end that may not be visible. Are there any violations on the home? Is this a court ordered home where it has to get approved before it can even be sold? Is it in a state?
Yeah.
All of these things, your real estate professional, at least that's the practice that I have and that Lou has administered in our offices. You do the back end research and due diligence. Now you can go through the deal and not do that due diligence, but it's going to hit you at some point in the process. When Yandi's going through or Michelle, the lender, is going through, those things will come up. And the thing is, you'll know sometimes violations, the brunt of getting those things fixed will not land on the seller. It might land on you as the buyer. So you might be getting a $20,000 deal on a property, but you might be faced with a $10,000 fine once you get into the property.
okay.
And you need to know that before you go into a deal. So that also factors.
Okay. And one thing I've noticed is we've been using the word realtor and then broker. Are they the same thing?
So technically, no. A broker is a real estate agent, right?
Okay.
In Illinois. And they can be a part of the National Association of Realtors, and then
Okay.
they have that branding, or they can operate independent of the National Association of Realtors. If they operate independently, they're still a licensed real estate agent or licensed real estate broker. They're just not affiliated with that interest group.
Got
for the
it.
most part.
Okay. And then two, just to kind of bring in our lender in on this conversation, typically, what would you say are some interest rates that you've seen for a first-time home buyer?
Well, there are a few different first-time homebuyer programs. Some of the first-time homebuyer programs may be for down payment assistance, right? So they may be getting assistance from the state of Illinois, for example. And so if you're receiving some sort of assistance, the interest rate is actually going to be higher than if you're getting a standard program because there's help right? So, so you have to consider that interest rate and that payment if you're going to get some sort of help for the down payment. Other first-time buyer programs will provide an incentive with a lower interest rate. So
Okay.
now maybe you're a first-time buyer and you're looking to put a minimum down payment of 3%. You can possibly get an interest rate similar to somebody who's putting 20% down.
Okay.
So those are the two different first-time buyer programs, generally speaking.
Okay.
So interest rates will vary. You know, I've seen rates, right now, rates are in the mid-4s for a 30-year fixed. If you're going with a standard conventional program, but if you're going with down payment assistance, now you're actually at the mid-5s
Okay.
with down payment assistance. So
Michelle, can I ask you a question? Just for those that may be watching, what do you mean when you say fixed? And what is the opposite of fixed?
So as far as down payment assistance and then lender programs, so fixed would be a fixed interest rate. So maybe, usually first-time home buyers are gonna go with a fixed rate. That means that your rate is never gonna change. That payment's always gonna remain the same. If there isn't a fixed rate, there's gonna be an adjustable rate. So that may mean that your rate may be fixed for a short period of time, anywhere from 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, or possibly 10 years. Those are the adjustments for the adjustable year mortgage. Can I actually dive right into like
Sure,
the
go
types
ahead, yeah.
Okay, so generally speaking, there's two types of lending programs. You're either going to get a conventional loan or you're going to get a government loan. And you know what I always tell people, the biggest difference between the two loan types has to do not just with minimum down payment, or interest rates, but also there's something called PMI, or also referred to as mortgage insurance. So mostly first-time buyers are looking to do minimum down payment, right? Would you guys agree?
Yeah, for sure.
So if you're looking to do minimum down payment, you are usually going to pay a mortgage insurance premium as part of your monthly payment. And so this mortgage insurance premium is built into your monthly payment, but with a conventional loan, at some point in the future when you've built enough equity, you can cancel this insurance, right? If you go with an FHA loan, which is a government loan, this insurance is not cancelable. So if you have an FHA loan, you put the minimum down payment, you own that home for 30 years, and you pay that mortgage for 30 years, that 30 years will always have an insurance payment. Okay, and the insurance is to protect the lender. And so it's all about risk, right? So the bank is looking at lending you money, but it's all risk-based. So if you're putting minimum down, then of course they want to protect themselves, and so that's why there's insurance in place. And so the rule is that if you go with a conventional loan and you're putting less than 20% down, then you're required to pay insurance. But if you're getting an FHA loan, you're always going to have this insurance because that's how the loan is funded. Because this is guaranteed monies to the lender by the government. So that's why it's a little bit different. So that's one of the biggest differences.
Okay.
And that's also the two basic loan types.
Okay, and I know you referenced conventional as well as FHA, but what about for first-time home buyers that are maybe veterans?
That's an excellent program, yes. So if you are a veteran, there is a VA loan that's available to you, and that's actually one of the best programs that are out there because now there is no minimum down. You can actually get 100% financing.
That's good.
And there's no insurance. So this mortgage insurance that I just talked about, that is not related to the VA loan because this is a guaranteed loan backed by VA. So you actually have a smaller housing payment. So if you're a veteran, you definitely want to make sure that you're taking advantage of your VA loan.
That's good. And so question, is this a good time to buy?
I think it's always a good time to buy. That's just my personal opinion.
Okay.
You know, now there may be a more riskier time to buy in certain areas.
Okay.
But I think that, like Lou said when we first started, I think, you know, home ownership is just a nugget to wealth generation and wealth creation. And I think that it's always, you know, a good time to do that. It's just finding what market works for you and your family and your budget.
And I'll add that a lot of times at my closings, when I'm letting the buyer know what their monthly payment is going to be, it's oftentimes less than what they were paying in rent.
For rents.
And so that's a pretty big thing for them to know that every time they make that monthly payment, they're building equity and it's less than what they were paying to their landlord.
Okay.
It's not always that way, but
Yeah.
but a good amount of times it is.
But that's a good question. I mean, a good point that you just brought up. I have a question because I've had people often ask about okay, if I get a home, then ultimately my mortgage is usually less than my rent. But we also know that there are a lot of things that homeowners become responsible for, that they're paying for, that maybe you weren't responsible for when you were renting. And I believe you talked about that earlier in the dialogue. So can we talk about, because what we really want to do is give a realistic perspective to that first-time home buyer, where they're really not just jumping out there like, oh, okay, well, I can outdo or outpace what I'm paying for rent right now, and dive directly into home ownership, and let them know what are some things they need to begin thinking about as far as fees to get to that bottom line number of what they'll be paying.
So I have a real life situation of something that just happened. You know, a lot of us experienced the polar vortex here in Chicago recently, and I had a pipe burst. And so water was down in my basement, and oh my God, you know, we had to deal with that. So that's a real life expense. We had to file an insurance claim. There was a $2,500 deductible. And so that is a real life experience and a real life expense that we had to take on. So we could not call a landlord in that situation. I wouldn't trade it for the world though, because yes, that did happen. But whenever we decide that we want to sell our home, we will owe whatever we owe back to the bank. And let's say, again, for easy math, let's say our home we sell it for $200,000. We owe the bank $100,000. We walk away with $100,000. I mean, aside from the fact that we do have to pay our closing costs. So for me, it's a good trade-off. It's something that I understand we have to deal with as it just relates to being a homeowner. And, you know, we deal with it and you move on. So there are those pros and cons that Walanda spoke about. But I mean, wholeheartedly believe that it's so much more benefit to own your home, you know, than to not.
But I also think it's, oh, I'm sorry.
No.
I also think it's very important to make intelligent decisions when buying a home. One of the things that I talk to a lot of first-time home buyers about is not necessarily buying a Cadillac when it's better to buy a Camry.
Okay.
Because when you're a homeowner, when things come up, it falls back on you. And if you stretch your budget all the way to the max, when those things come up, then you're going to be in a position where you may not be able to handle it. It's critically important. Lenders will, and Michelle talked about this earlier, they'll tell you what you can purchase, but sometimes what you can purchase is not what you should purchase. So.
The other thing,
go ahead.
can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
This is also really important, again, back to the inspection. So if you're going through your inspection, that probably takes 2 to 4 hours just to kind of go, and you're walking through your home, you're walking with the inspector. But look at things. What's the age of the roof? Your realtor should know that, or should be getting that information from you, because that's an expense. Are the windows newer? That's an expense. What about, is the porch newer? If you live in the city of Chicago, porches have to be to a certain code. That's an expense. Also your furnace, how old is it? When will it need to be replaced? Your water heater, what's the age of it? So when you're walking through, even if you decide not to negotiate, you got a really good deal on the home, you're gonna close on the home, that's great. If you've walked through that inspection and you have that inspection report, remember the age of those particular utilities, because they're gonna be coming at some point, and that's gonna be the expense of that first-time home buyer. So that's a place where you can begin to save and think about what your expenses may be and when they'll hit.
Okay, and you know, it brings me to another point, just the dialogue between the two of you, and it brings up this question about, well, we know that life sometimes happens, and what I mean by that is sometimes people may lose their jobs, some people may fall ill, and what do they do at that point in time? It's like, I'm not a renter anymore. This is my home, and maybe I don't have employment at the moment. What's available to them?
Well, that's why, first, I say it's very important to kind of buy under your budget, because you always have to have emergency funds when things come up. Real life is real life.
Okay.
And there are some programs out here that will help someone who's lost their job and they cannot currently pay their mortgage. But the reality is, when it all boils down to it, it's going to fall back on you and what your savings look like.
Okay.
So it's important not to stretch. And I say this over and over and over again. Some of my clients listen. Some of them don't. And I always pray that they're not coming back to me next year saying, hey, Lou, can you sell my property that I just sold you to it? It's just important to operate frugally and financially wise. Yeah.
Okay.
And I'll add that in your mortgage, there's actually a clause that talks about an acceleration. So in the event that you stop making your mortgage payments, let's say you're 3, 4, 5 months, you know, in default, the bank can accelerate your loan and say, okay, it's all due immediately because you're not making your payments. But if you communicate to the bank and you say, I've lost my job, I'm on short-term disability, or whatever the case may be, the bank doesn't want to place a lien on your property. They don't want to take the property from you. They want to work with you. And
That's
so
good to know.
there are ways that you can try to do what's called a loan modification, which is essentially some sort of like payment plan to get you back on track. So it's not the end of the world if you lose your job, but it's really important to be very communicative with your bank in the event that something like that happens.
Okay.
So that they can jump in before you're like too far underwater to help you get back on track.
Got it. Okay. And then another question, what is equity? I keep hearing that word, equity. What is equity?
So equity is basically the difference in what you owe on that property and what that property is worth on the market.
Okay.
So if you go to a realtor and you say, hey, how much is my property worth? And we do the comparative market analysis, and it's worth $200,000, but you only owe $150,000. Then theoretically you have about $50,000 in equity in that property.
And equity means that that's your money in
Absolutely.
theory.
In theory.
If you sell your property and then lose, example, you have $50,000 after you've paid your closing costs, that's what you profit. That's what you walk away with.
And your realtor fees.
And your realtor fees. And your attorney fees. But after you've paid, you've paid everything, that's what you essentially walk away with.
Okay. And then two, let's talk about taxes, right? So we know that ultimately there are taxes that we have to pay in addition to our mortgage. What if I feel like my taxes are a bit too high? What can I do?
Yeah, so the Cook County Board of Review is actually a really great agency that their whole job is to try to lower your taxes if you qualify. So essentially what they do is they look at your tax bill, and let's say that your tax bill is $5,000 annually. You can file a complaint with the Cook County Board of Review. You can do it online, and you essentially say, I want to appeal my taxes. They will then look at the areas around you. So I remember Lou and Rolanda kind of talked about, apples to apples. So they'll do the same thing. They'll look at your home. They'll say you have a brick house. It's a 3-room. And they look at similar situated homes to see what other people in your area are paying.
Okay.
They'll also look at other circumstances like, what if there are a lot of foreclosures in your area? Because that impacts the amount that your property taxes should be. So in the event that they say, okay, there's a case to be made that your taxes should be lower, they will lower them. And this is a free service.
That's awesome. That's good to know. Does it ever work in reverse? Like
No,
if
that was my next point.
Okay.
So they cannot, their job is also not to raise taxes
Okay, good,
in the event that your appeal is denied. So the worst thing that can happen is they will deny your appeal.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's something that people should really take advantage of. In addition to that, there are all sorts of exemptions that people can qualify for. So when you purchase a home, there's something called a homeowners exemption.
Okay.
You have to have lived in your home as of January 1st of that year, and then you file paperwork. And so the next tax year, you're going to get a benefit from living there. Same thing if you're a senior citizen, same thing if you're disabled or if you're a veteran. So it's really important to contact the Cook County Assessor's Office once you've purchased a home to determine what your exemptions look like in any filing deadlines to get that in place.
And for existing homeowners, we're talking a lot about first-time home buyers. Sometimes they don't have their exemptions renewed, and they're paying over the tax amount every year. I just actually had a listing consultation with a potential seller yesterday. Looked at the taxes from last year, and I saw that their homeowner exemption wasn't applied. So they're owed money at least for that last year. And if they hadn't been doing it for the years before, they may be owed money, and they can go back and appeal that and get that money back.
And so what they do in that instance is called filing for a certificate of error. And so you are basically saying there was an error on my taxes. I had not said yet that I was a veteran, or had not told the assessor's office yet that I should have been getting this exemption. And then they will go back. I believe there's a time frame. I think it's only 3 years that they'll retroactively go back and pay you out and give you a check for the fact that you were overpaying your taxes.
And it can be a
That's
pretty,
good to
pretty
know.
big check. Yeah.
That's really good to know. But not for you to spend, for you to save. It's for you to save and invest. There we go. Okay, so how does credit affect us as far as our ability to get a loan, and then also the loan interest rate?
Credit is going to be very important. The credit score is going to indicate what programs may be available to you. There are programs that also offer financing if you don't have a credit score, but you'll be limited. So having good credit, because remember, we go back to the fact that this is a risk for the lender, right? They're giving out money, so they have to assess the risk. And so if you have a good credit rating, then you have shown that you are responsible with your obligations, and so you're going to be looking at better interest rates, right? If your credit score is fair, not as strong, then you may not get the best market rate that's on the market. You know, so that's how it's going to affect you. So it's going to affect the qualification of programs, and then of course the rate that you'll be paying.
And question, so does the buyer have the right to maybe write letters to have those things that are derogatory on their credit removed?
Absolutely, yes. If you have looked over your credit and you do know that there are either errors or items that should have already been deleted, you can always file a dispute with all 3 credit bureaus to have those updated. It usually takes about 30 days for the creditor to respond, but definitely work on your credit if you know that there are items that have to be removed.
Got it. Okay, now question, are there any other things maybe we're missing that we need to be educating the first time? I think we've covered a lot of information.
I do want to add on.
Yeah.
So when I went over the 2 basic loan types, I didn't dive in on the fact that there are programs out there that do allow buyers to buy with little to like 1% of the purchase price, which essentially means that you could potentially buy a home. Let's go back to that $200,000 purchase price. You could essentially buy a home for $2,000 with the down payment assistance programs. So I didn't dive into that earlier because I wanted to just kind of throw out the general information, but there are a lot of home buyer incentives. And because there's so many programs and qualification, I didn't want to put too much information out there to make it confusing, but a person can buy with little to like, you know, a couple $1,000s. But what I think is important in all this, as we discuss budget, when you're figuring out, you know, what your monthly payment is, right? That's number one with your personal budget. The second part of your budget is how much cash can you spend comfortably.
Okay.
There are different sources that you can use for your down payment. You may have checking, savings. You may have 401k that allows you to borrow against. You may have family that's willing to help you. It's important to determine at the beginning, when you're figuring out your cash budget, how much money can you put together for this purchase, and of that, how much money would you feel comfortable spending?
Okay.
Because ultimately, yes, you're going to be responsible for maintenance. Things may happen, life happens, so you want to make sure that you're buying with money left over in the bank for those what ifs.
That's good to know.
And I just have 2 additional thoughts. One is that something that I didn't know about before I started my journey to wanting to purchase a home is that there are certain loan products out there for entrepreneurs. So there are people out there who are self-employed and who maybe, you know, in terms of what they write off, they might show that they write off too much and they can't afford a home. And so at least can't afford a home in terms of what they're showing in their taxes, right?
Okay.
So Michelle knows about programs that are out there that exist for people who are entrepreneurs who want to be able to qualify for a home but have to do so in a non-conventional way. The other thing I wanted to mention is that there are also 203K loans, which are loans for when you are looking to rehab a home. And so sometimes there are properties out there where someone says, you know what, I want to go in and I want to do some work myself, or I want to do a whole gut rehab. And so Michelle knows about those products as well to help people get into homes if they are interested in kind of making the home what their vision is of that property.
Can I weigh in on that?
Of course.
So one of the things with 203Ks and any kind of renovation loan is that if you have a stomach to go through a renovation process, sometimes you can actually get the same home that you will buy from someone else finished for a little bit cheaper. So let's say we're working with that $200,000 home that's been rehabbed. The investor has his profit built into that $200,000 price. Theoretically, you could probably, or you might be able to get that home for $100,000, put $50,000 into it where it looks like that $200,000 home, but you walk into a home that's just like the $200,000 home with $50,000 worth of equity.
So how do we know if it will cost us $50,000 to rehab? Remember, we're talking to a first-time home buyer who really knows nothing too much about the cost, you know, as far as construction or rebuilding kitchens or things like that. So would our broker or realtor tell us, like, hey, it won't cost you that much, take this deal?
Well, I would say your realtor may not inform you because they're not a contractor, right? But this is where your team is really important, and your realtor is almost kind of like the quarterback, so to speak, of your team, right? And so when I'm working with clients, I'm working with a client now who's doing a rehab, and so they're doing a full gut. So I went in with them, we saw the property, we made an offer, and I recommended that they got 3 contractors to come out. And so 3 contractors are talking to them to say this is what it will be to kind of, you know, put this into this home. Now we have an architect that's coming in and kind of talking about it. And so I'm just kind of, I know what they want, and I'm just kind of quarterbacking, you know, kind of everything. That's why it's really, really important. The realtor that you work with has to have your best interest in mind.
And resources.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can kind of build the team. And we may not make recommendations, right? Because you're ultimately the owner, and these are the people, when the deal is done, the realtor, the attorney will be done, and your contractor and architect, they're gonna be the ones who are gonna be finishing this. So the buyer ultimately has to have the right relationships, like it has to work. They're ultimately making the decision, but your realtor is there saying, I got you, here's a team of people, you know what I mean? Here, they can inform you at this phase.
That's good.
If you're doing a renovation, what the realtor is really, the critical role is to tell you what that property is going to be worth after it's fixed up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because you can work with a contractor, or if you're doing a 203K, you'll work with a 203K specialist. That specialist will come in, analyze that property from top to bottom, and tell you it's going to take you $75,000 to fix this property up. If you buy it at 100 and you put $75,000 into it, then we have to know that that property is going to be worth $175,000 on the back end.
Yep.
Because if not, the deal is not feasible and everything falls apart. So your realtor is critical. I'm glad you said that, as the guide to make sure you're not getting into something that you can't finish.
Okay, and I feel you guys pulling on me. I'm gonna ask the question. They wanna know about the down payment assistance programs. Where can they find out about these programs? That's to you. And second part is you mentioned about for the entrepreneur, that there are programs available for them. Where can they find out about those programs? So you first, and then you can go.
Well, you can call me.
Simply put, right?
Her answer is call Michelle. There you go.
Yeah, the most popular program, I will say, is the Illinois Housing Department Authority, ihda.org. It'll have information on there about different programs, but that's one of many. I mean, we offer, I think, about 8 different, actually 9 different down payment assistance programs.
That's
So
good.
they're really, I mean, there's too many to kind of share today, but I'm happy to go over all those different options and see what's best for you.
That's good information to know. Okay, can someone explain what happened in 2008 with the real estate bubble? Does anybody want to take that question?
It's definitely sticky, and there are a number of different angles
Okay.
when it comes to that. You talk to one economist, they'll say this. You talk to one realtor, they'll say that. I think what in essence happened is that a lot of properties that people bought were not worth what they thought they were. And there's a number of reasons why that happened.
Okay.
And at the end of the day, those properties, a lot of them went into distressed situations. Those people couldn't pay the mortgage on them, and they couldn't sell them to get their money back, and it caused a crash in the housing market.
Okay.
And there was some lending that was happening for people who should not have qualified for loans. So the process to get a loan was not nearly as strenuous as it is now. And so a lot of people were essentially giving loans who could not really sustain their loan payment.
And what that did is it created an artificial demand. So if you got a bunch of people chasing properties because they can get loans easy without this oversight,
Yeah.
Back at close. And they would say,
the
I'm not.
values of the property go up
Yeah.
artificially. And
Okay.
at some point, the bubble burst.
Okay.
So,
Okay. That's good information to know. So is there anything additional that we may have missed in this first-time home buyer segment that we need to make sure that we cover in this moment that you feel will be an essential piece?
I just want to repeat, make sure you go, and Walana said this earlier, make sure you go to a first-time home buyer workshop and learn the process before getting into the process.
Okay.
It's
I
critical.
will also say that I've worked with clients, and they would say, I'm not making enough money, or I have this kind of going on with my credit. And I would say, locate yourself. When I say locate yourself, talk to a realtor, talk to a lender. There's so many clients that I have that I've worked with who are now in homes who said that they were not ready, and I got them connected with the lender, with Michelle, and they were like, oh wow, I can buy a home. And their salary was, they were like, I didn't think I can buy a home at this salary. And they are homeowners, not just homeowners, some of them have bought multi-unit properties, and so now they're collecting rents. And so I would just say, especially for the first-time home buyer, sometimes there's a fear that I'm not ready, I don't make enough, I can't live where I want to live or whatever. But like Lou said, we all have to live somewhere, right? You can rent, you can buy, and I would just say locate yourself, talk to a realtor, talk to a lender, and take the step.
And let's go ahead and get the ball rolling, guys. So I'm excited for all of you first-time home buyers who are tuning into this segment. I want to thank you all for coming today on our show.
Thank you, Jill.
For more information, Actually, let's slow down. How can people contact each of you? This is important.
Absolutely. So I am Yandi Morris of Knight Morris and Reddick Law Group. I can be contacted via email at ymorris@kmrlawgroup.com, or you can go to kmrlawgroup.com just in general to check out our website.
I am Tyler McGee. I am the owner and managing broker of Ani Real Estate. If you want to contact me or anyone on my team, you can email us at office@anirealestate.com.
And I'm Walanda Cannon. I'm a realtor and broker with Ani Real Estate. I can be reached at walandacannon.com or walandacannon@anirealestate.com.
And I'm Michelle Ponte-Baxa with Pearl Mortgage. My email address is michelle.baxa@mypearlteam.com.
Awesome. And thank you all for tuning in to our segment on First Time Home Buyer. We look forward to seeing you on our next segment where we will be talking about real estate investing. Tune in. Have a great day. We want to hear from you. Submit your questions in advance to moneymondays@jbs.edu for our next podcast, where we'll be discussing real estate investing. For those of you who would like more information about the First Time Home Buyer program or even workshops that we offer here at the Joseph Business School, be sure to tune in and check out our website at www.jbs.edu. There is a workshop that will be available and coming soon, April the 23rd this year from 6:15 to 9:15 p.m. For more information, check out our website. Don't forget to join us every first and third Monday of the month for a new money topic around money management and wealth creation. Subscribe to the JBS YouTube channel. And as always, I'm your host, Jill Thompson, and I look forward to seeing you prosper.